Imagine two guys, Mark and Dave. They're identical twins, 30 years old, living what looks like the exact same life from the outside. They work the same job, they pull in the same $75,000 salary, and they live in identical houses right next door to each other in the same quiet suburb. They even drive the same model of gray sedan. On paper, their financial lives are indistinguishable. If you looked at their bank statements, they'd look like mirrors of one another. But over the next 30 years, Mark is going to end up paying $250,000 more than Dave for that exact same life. He isn't lighting that money on fire. He isn't losing it in some high-stakes crypto gamble or a failed business venture. He's simply handing it over to banks, insurance companies, and landlords. Why? Because of a secret 3-digit number attached to his name. Mark has a 640, Dave has a 760. This is what I call the invisible tax. It's the one nobody talks about at the dinner table. We spend all day obsessing over income taxes, property taxes, and sales taxes, but we completely ignore the credit tax, which is arguably the most aggressive destroyer of wealth in the modern American economy. My name is Bill, and I spend way too much of my time obsessing over the gamification of our financial system. I'm fascinated and frankly a little terrified by how the rules are rigged to keep people at the bottom from ever leveling up. If you're someone who pays your bills on time but still feels like the system is looking down on you, or if you've ever been scared to buy a new sofa because you didn't want your score to drop 5 points, you need to hear this. Today, we are exposing the credit score for what it actually is. It's not a measure of your moral character. It's not a measure of your hard work. It isn't even a measure of your actual wealth. It is a metric used by the banking cartel to determine exactly how profitable you are to them.
Understanding this game isn't just a hobby, it's a survival tactic. It's about clawing back that $250,000 that belongs in your pocket, not the bank's. Here's the first thing that usually shocks people. The credit score as we know it, the FICO score, is younger than most of the people watching this. It was introduced in 1989. Before that, lending was a human process. Now, let's be real. That old system had massive problems. It was filled with human bias and systemic racism that we are still untangling today. But when we moved to the new system, we didn't necessarily get fairness. We traded human bias for algorithmic ruthlessness. We've been brainwashed into thinking this score is some ancient, fundamental pillar of civilization, like it dates back to Rome or something. In reality, it's a very recent corporate invention. It was designed to standardize risk so that debt could be packaged into neat little bundles and sold to investors. In doing so, the industry created a modern caste system. On one side, you have the prime borrowers who get access to cheap money, basically free money when you factor in inflation. On the other side, you have the subprime borrowers who are forced to pay a surcharge on their very existence. If you aren't in that top tier, you are paying a penalty for every major life decision you make. This isn't just about a shiny piece of plastic in your wallet. It's about the structural way wealth is siphoned away from the middle class and redirected toward massive financial institutions. When you realize that the system is an algorithm designed by corporations to maximize their own security, you stop looking at your score as a grade of your goodness and start seeing it as a hurdle in a game. And once you see it as a game, you can start learning how to play it. We have to stop being the players who just follow the prompts and start becoming the ones who understand the underlying code. The stakes are too high to stay ignorant. Every point on that score represents thousands of dollars of your future labor.
If we don't master this system, the credit tax will continue to be the silent vacuum that sucks the life out of our long-term financial freedom. Let's look at the actual math, because once you see the numbers, they are genuinely terrifying. The biggest purchase of your life is almost certainly going to be a home. Let's say you're looking at a $400,000 house in today's market. If you have a gold-plated credit score of 760 or higher, you're going to get the best advertised rate available. Let's call it 6% for the sake of the math. But if you have a score of 620, which is considered fair and is exactly where millions of hard-working, honest Americans sit, The banks see you as a risk. They aren't going to deny you the loan. That would be leaving too much money on the table. Instead, they charge you a risk premium. They bump your interest rate up by maybe just 1.5%, taking you to 7.5%. On a brochure, 1.5% sounds like pennies. It sounds trivial. But when you run the actual amortization schedule over a 30-year mortgage, that small gap adds up to roughly $120,000 in extra interest payments. Think about that for a second. You are buying the exact same drywall, the exact same roof, and the exact same patch of grass as your neighbor, but you are paying over $100,000 more simply because an algorithm from 1989 said you were less reliable. That is $120,000 that you cannot invest in the S&P 500. If you had taken that extra interest money and invested it over those 30 years, it would have compounded into nearly $500,000. So the true opportunity cost of a mediocre credit score isn't just the interest. It is the systematic destruction of your retirement fund. It is wealth being transferred directly from your future self's pocket to the bank's bottom line. But the scam goes so much deeper than just mortgages. We have entered what I call Black Mirror territory, where your credit score has mutated into a universal reputation score. In most states, auto insurance companies use your credit score to determine your premium. They've decided, based on their actuarial tables, that if you have a lower credit score, you are statistically more likely to crash your car. This means that even if you have a perfect driving record, no tickets, no accidents, you drive like a grandma, if your credit score dips, your car insurance goes up. Studies have shown that a safe driver with a clean record but poor credit often pays double what a driver with a DUI conviction and perfect credit pays. Let that sink in. The system trusts a drunk driver with an 800 score more than a safe driver with a 600 score. This is the poverty premium in action.
It doesn't stop at the driveway either. Landlords use this number to decide if you're worthy of a roof over your head. Utility companies use it to justify charging you hundreds of dollars in security deposits just to turn the lights on. Even employers in sectors like finance, defense, or government check your credit as part of a background check. You could be the most qualified candidate for a job, but if you missed a few credit card payments 3 years ago during a medical emergency, you might be flagged as irresponsible and passed over. The score has shifted from a tool for assessing lending risk into a universal judgment of your value as a human being. It determines where you can live, what you can drive, and even where you can work. The most twisted part of this entire game is the logic behind how the score is calculated. It doesn't actually measure your wealth. You could have $10 million in cash sitting in a duffel bag under your bed, but if you've never taken out a loan, you might have a 0 or unscorable credit rating. To the algorithm, you are a ghost. You don't exist because you haven't participated in the debt cycle. Conversely, you could be completely broke, living paycheck to paycheck and drowning in minimum payments. But if you constantly borrow money and pay it back just in time, the system thinks you're a superstar. The score rewards churn. It rewards staying in the debt loop. It actually hates people who use cash, and it even punishes people who pay off their loans too early. Have you ever finally paid off a car loan and watched your credit score drop 20 points the next month? That is the system telling you the quiet part out loud. They liked you better when you were paying them interest. When you stop being a source of interest income, you're less useful to them, so your score goes down. It's a loyalty program for debt slaves, plain and simple. To really beat this system, we have to pull back the curtain and look at the specific mechanics, because in this game, ignorance is the most expensive mistake you can make. The biggest chunk of your score, 35% of the total, is your payment history. This is a binary, cold-blooded metric. You either paid on time or you didn't. One single missed payment can wreck your score for years, acting like a stain that refuses to wash out. But the second biggest piece of the puzzle, accounting for 30%, is your credit utilization. This is the ratio of how much credit you actually have versus how much you're using.
If you have a credit card with a $1,000 limit and you spend $500, your utilization is 50%. The algorithm absolutely hates that. It smells fear. It thinks you're desperate for cash. But here's the trick. If you call the bank and get them to raise your limit to $10,000 and you still spend that same $500, your utilization drops to 5%. You didn't pay off a cent of debt. You just changed the denominator. This is a game of optics. The goal is to look like you have access to millions of dollars, but have absolutely zero desire to spend a dime of it. Then there is the authorized user hack, which is one of the primary ways wealthy families pass on good credit like it's a genetic trait. A parent with a perfect 800 score adds their 18-year-old kid as an authorized user on a long-standing credit card. The kid never even sees the physical card, let alone spends money on it. But the entire history of that account, 20 years of perfect on-time payments, gets copy-pasted onto the kid's credit report. That teenager wakes up on their 19th birthday with a 780 score. They walk into a dealership and get a 0% APR loan. Meanwhile, the kid whose parents have bad credit starts at zero, or worse, inherits the same structural disadvantages. They walk into that same dealership and get hit with a 15% predatory loan. This is the invisible inheritance of inequality baked right into the software. But what happens when things go wrong? This is where the credit repair industry thrives, and frankly, 90% of it is a total scam. However, the mechanism they use is real, and it's something you can do yourself. It relies on the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The law states that every single piece of information on your credit report must be 100% accurate, and most importantly, verifiable. If there is even a tiny mistake, a misspelled name, a wrong date, a digit out of place, you have the legal right to dispute it. If the credit bureau cannot verify that debt with the original lender within 30 days, they are legally required to delete it. People aren't necessarily proving they didn't owe the money, they are proving that the bank's paperwork is a mess.
It's a legal loophole, and while the wealthy use loopholes for taxes every single day, you should be using them for your credit. Now, I know some of you might be fans of the cash is king philosophy. You might say, Bill, credit scores are for debt, and debt is dumb. I'm just going to opt out. And look, I respect the purity of that. If you can buy a house in cold hard cash, do it. Exit the matrix. But for 99% of people, you will eventually need a mortgage. You will need insurance. Living in modern America with a 0 credit score is like playing a video game on hard mode for no reason. You will face friction at every turn, from higher deposits to denied rental applications. The pragmatic move isn't to boycott the score, it's to manipulate it. Treat it like an annoying, mandatory minute game that you have to speed run so you can get the rewards and get out. The bottom line is this: you cannot let your credit score be a validation of your self-worth. It is a game token. It is a VIP pass that gets you into the room with the cheap interest rates. You need to protect it viciously, not because you care what a bank thinks of you, but because you refuse to pay the ghetto tax. You refuse to hand over an extra $250,000 over your lifetime. You want that money in your own investment account, compounding for your own freedom. To dominate the score, you have to be organized. Automate your payments so you never miss a deadline. Every 6 months, ask for a limit increase to pad your utilization buffer. Never close your oldest accounts because that history is the anchor of your reputation. Dispute every single error because 1 in 5 reports has a mistake. The system is designed to extract wealth from the disorganized. By getting organized and understanding the algorithm, you become unprofitable to them in the short term because you pay no fees, but highly trusted in the long term with low rates. That is the sweet spot. Let's stop giving them our money and start playing the game to win. Would you like me to draft a checklist of the specific steps to take every 6 months to keep your score in that elite bracket?